Jaz bi vas najprej vse lepo pozdravil v imenu Založbe CF, v imenu Italijanskega inštituta za kulturo, knjigarne Azil in pa projekta Imuno. Hkrati bi se tudi rad najlepše zahvalil Italijanskemu inštitutu za kulturo in pa knjigarni Azil za izpeljavo te okrogle mize. Prav tako bi se rad zahvalil dr. Marku Pokornu, da se je udeležil te okrogle mize in pa seveda profesorju Grignoliju, da boste sodelovali. Andrea Grignoliom poučuje zgodovino medicine in bioetike na univerzi Vita Salute svetega Rafaela v Milanu. V svojem raziskovalnem delu se osredotoča na zgodovino biomedicinskih disciplin v zahodni družbi 20. stoletja s posebnim fokusom na imunologiji. Svoje prispevke objavlja v mednarodnih znanstvenih revijah, njegova knjiga Kdo se boji cepiv je bila v Italiji uvrščena med finaliste nacionalne nagrade za popularizacijo znanosti leta 2016 ter v najožji izbor za nagrado Galileo leta 2017. Grignolio je tudi stalni kolumnist italijanskega časnika La Repubblica in zase pravi, da je popularizacija znanosti eno njegovih najljubših področij delovanja. Docent dr. Marko Pokorn, doktor medicine, specialist pediatrije in infektologije, je v prostem času tudi odličen scenarist, dramatik in glasbenik. Že od leta 1994 je zaposlen na pediatričnem oddelku infekcijske klinike UKC Ljubljana ter na katedri za infekcijske bolezni in epidemiologijo na Medicinski fakulteti v Ljubljani. Veliko izkušenj ima starši otrok, ki zavračajo cepljenje, ter s ponovnim pojavljanjem bolezni in zapletov, ki so posledica upadanja precepljenosti. Poleg tega je tudi izjemno aktiven v ozaveščanju javnosti o pomembnosti cepljenja. Tukaj smo se zbrali zaradi tega, ker je prišel avtor dela Kdo se boji cepiv, ki na svež in celosten način obravnava pomembnost ter varnost cepiv, namenjeno pa je tako laikom kot stroki. Prvim znanost, ki obkroža cepljenje, približa na razumljiv način, drugim pa ponuja novo perspektivo razumevanja zavračanja cepljenja. Ob preobilici informacij danes je tako pregledno delo nad vse dobrodošlo. Skozi poglavje preletimo zgodovino cepljenja, na koncu pa se avtor posveti najnovejšim kognitivnim oziroma nevroznanstvenim razlagam zavračanja cepljenja. Ponuja tudi vrsto uporabnih predlogov, hkrati pa odpira tudi nekaj zanimivih dilem, o katerih bi danes tudi malce spregovorili. So, now we will switch to English, and I wish to start the debate by posing a question regarding science in general. This, of course, also concerns vaccination, since distrust in science can lead to vaccine hesitancy. I will pose the questions to Professor Grignoliom, but you can both answer, of course. So, at the beginning of the book, you quote John Adams, who says that liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. At the same time, you present the fact that the majority of vaccine hesitancy and skepsis of science in general arise from the educated social classes. At first glance, this might seem contradictory. Yet distrust can be the consequence of fear of the unknown, but, as you mention in your book, it can also be the consequence of knowledge. For example, knowing that eugenics was a part of science, or a more relevant nowadays example, that science is not exempt from financial and political interests and ideology in general. Isn't this all a source of justified doubt? Is distrust or doubt even that wrong in that case? After all, relentless questioning of temporary knowledge is what differentiates science from dogmatism. Then again, as you emphasize in your book, distrust in science can be very problematic, especially when taken to the extreme, when it places science at the same level as charlatanism, which we also see in some people's stances toward vaccination. So my question to you is, what is in your opinion the responsibility that scientists and science itself have for distrust in science that we see nowadays?
A very complicated question. Thank you. Let me thank you at the beginning. I'm very happy to be here. Ljubljana is a place of my heart. I always really think that sooner or later I would visit Ljubljana. So this is my first time. So I'm very happy, and I more than happy that the Slovenian translation of my book is present. So thank you for all. Indeed, the problem of vaccination is a general problem. We are now assisting to a sort of mistrust in the establishment and institution in Europe. It's a general problem. During an interview a couple of hours ago, I have said that we are now assisting to a huge, for the first time in the history of mankind, a huge flow of information is now available from citizens. Just think something like 10 years ago, it was impossible from citizens to realize the adverse reaction of vaccination, because data were not available. So it was quite normal from citizen to accept, the position of a physician. But now, through the website, all the people can just realize all the data from vaccination. And on one level, this is a good thing, because, transparency, data are now available. On one side, we can consider this, a step towards democracy. But on the other side, we forgot to give to citizens, beside the information, the cognitive tools to manage all this information. Because it's very complicated to understand, to compare, for instance, the adverse reaction of a vaccination to adverse reaction of any other pharmaceutical treatment, aspirin, for instance. Aspirins have 10,000 more adverse reaction if compared to vaccines, but there is no anti-aspirin movement. So, and all the parents give aspirins or several other pharmaceutical treatment to their kids without any problem. I don't want to take too much time for any answer, but basically this is, I offer a neurocognitive explanation, in the sense that on one level I realized through the economical research of Nobel Prize winner in economy, Dan Kahneman, who coined the term of bounded rationality, that we are extremely, as a human species, irrational. We are not linear in our thinking. We have a huge problem to balance pros and cons, adverse reaction, and so we all have problems, not only in health problem, but also in economy, love, human relationship. Why? Because we, as a species, have been selected to live in an environment which is not the environment of science. And then we have problem to understand science. Science is only, and vaccination is a part of science, of course, science pop up in the history of mankind very recently. So as a species and as a society, we need to get involved in science for much more time to understand how to manage very complex information. I would start with this answer, and then we go back into the details.
Do you have anything to add? So, if I understand correctly, you say that the distrust in science stems from not being able to fully understand the scientific method, for example.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Indeed, we have problem with GMOs. We have problem with oncologic treatment. There are a lot of alternative and complementary medicine approach to very dangerous diseases like cancer. In Italy, in the last year, we have lost 6 women. Women are particularly sensible to this problem. I don't know why. There were 5 mothers with kids that refuse the proper oncologic treatment, and they tend to use natural treatment to cure cancer. Distrust on one level, of course, has science mistrust has a neurocognitive basis, but on the other, the web, all the information available on the website it's another important point. There is a lot of counter information on the website. Let me just start with a few slides. Let me just show you these 2 slides. One is international and one is Slovenian. I found a very interesting Slovenian research. This is a recent research, 2018, in which, this paper examines the behavioral changes in online interest in terms of measles. Basically, this research tries to understand the relationship between no-vaxxers information on the website and vaccination rate in certain part of the world. And they discover that there is a correlation, a strict correlation. When you look, if you analyze the website and you look that people in a certain part of the Western world look for no-vax information, then you will find a low level of vaccination. So this is it's a research in 28 European countries for almost 10 years. And also this interesting research made here in Slovenian. You see, vaccination coverage is dropping in several countries, including Slovenia. More and more people hesitate or even reject vaccination. As the influence of the internet grows, the question becomes how to communicate about vaccination to parents in order to prevent this drop in vaccination coverage among children. So, and this research analyzed that, the first point is more often the parents seek information about vaccination from friends. This is another important point. You see, we moved from listening the MD, the medical doctor, the physician, the general practitioner, 15 years ago, 10 years, 20 years ago. Now, this is quite typical case. If you ask people that hesitating parents, and you ask them where did you find this kind of information? One of the first answer is, a friend of mine told me that there is a relationship between autism and vaccination, which is a fake. It's a fake information. So this is attitude. It was cognitive psychologists called tribalism. So they discovered that a big part of our decision, even in health problem, come from the information and beliefs of the people that we get along with. Okay, so this is a very important. Another point is that the third point is the mothers that problematize the safety of vaccines more here, and are afraid of the adverse events tend to be in favor of alternative options, you know. The website is full, plenty of alternative options and alternative medicines. And the more you are educated and affluent, and the more you think that you can avoid the physician suggestions and tips, and you can rely on your own information. I just want to show you this. This article, which is very clear. Wealthy Los Angeles school vaccination rates are as low as South Sudan. In Hollywood, you know, they're quite rich, the level of education is very high, and the vaccination is very low. And we have the same problem all over Europe. In the English version of my book, From Springer, I devoted a big part of my analysis to cover the vaccination rate all over the world. I mean, the Western culture, Australia, US, Britain, and Europe. And this is a quite common.
Okay, so right now you also touched the subject of the ease of access to misinformation. So in the last couple of months, we have seen that some social media and some online platforms have already set a goal to ban these kind of posts that contain vaccine hesitancy information and stuff like that. So I ask you, what is your opinion on censoring content, even though it may be harmful? Isn't this considered treating the symptom but not the disease? So what do you think is a possible, maybe alternative solution? Or do you believe that censorship is the way to go here?
No, absolutely. I hate censorship in any form. I'm liberal as a philosophical position. So, and responsibility has to be put on the shoulders of any individuals and citizens to me. To me, the solution, and in certain sense, I also answered your first questions. Scientists have to play a new role in a knowledge society. We are living in a knowledge society. The last point of the Slovenian paper is very interesting, and this is one of the point of my book, conclusion. There is a huge need for intensive professional communication about vaccination on the internet and social media. The improvement of the communicational competences of doctors and healthcare workers is essential. In the last 10 years, social media and the internet changed completely our relationship with information, institution, and expertise. But, you know, I'm not criticizing the medical doctors faculty. But I'm saying that, you know, coming out from the medical school, physicians are tendentially accustomed to stay in their lab and to say to the patient, okay, this is my diagnosis, this is my treatment, just follow. In the last 15 years, with the, you know, with the internet, everything changed. And we have to, you know, to train not only physicians, but all the experts, all the people in charge and that deal with technical information, geneticists, for instance, to communicate with people and citizens that are now, educated, sometimes well educated, sometimes not really well, because they base their idea on the website, and this is a new era of the relationship between science and society. To me, I was 2 weeks ago in Rome in a lab of an MD, of a physician, and there was a piece of paper in which he had written, "Please, if you follow Dr. Google, don't ask me any questions." So there is something new over here, that you, as a patient, offer, ask for a doctor. The doctor gives you his diagnosis and treatment, and you go at home, browse on the web, and you can make your own idea of the diagnosis and treatment. And then you go back to the doctor and challenge the information with the doctor. Refusals, to counteract this attitude, which is very complex. I perfectly understand the doctor that, give back this kind of, that refuse this attitude. But at the same time, a lot of data confirm that all the doctor that, close the communication channel with the patient, create, what I call the Taliban, the Novaxers. If you refuse to this new challenge, if you don't try to convince them by using scientific argument, then probably we will have much more problem in the next decades.
Would you like?
I'm surprised but this is the results that you presented are, let's say, abstracted results from the study that was done in the last couple of years and was published as a monograph in 2018 about the perception of vaccination in Slovenia. I'm very much involved in the communication of the risks of vaccines and the risks of diseases that these vaccines prevent. And I think that I know that there is a need for, for innovative approaches in communicating scientific information to the parents or to the patients. But you have to be frank and you have to present, let's say, the data quite clearly. So this can be evident and the decision can be made, let's say, more easily. But, it's a decision that has to be made. So, and, also from my clinical experience, I know, if I analyze myself, how do I make decisions? It's not always completely rational. So it's a mixture of scientific evidence you have, but also, it is influenced by, let's say, recent clinical experience you had a bad case, then probably if you had a bad case of some infectious disease, then you probably treat the next couple of cases more conservatively or more, let's say, with more care. So decision-making is a very complex process. And we have to, let's say, to address that when we talk to the parents. And vaccines are a special issue, and it's been mandatory for ages in our country. And I think that with the new vaccines being introduced in the National Immunization Program in Slovenia, the last two, the pneumococcal vaccine, the HPV vaccine that have been introduced, and they are paid by the state, but at the same time, they are not mandatory. And vaccination rates are
Going down.
Going down or started low, and they even got lower in case of HPV. So I think the message that the public health sent to the public by introducing new vaccines on a non-mandatory basis was, well, they are here, but we don't think that it's cool, but it's not that good that we would, let's say, because if it's mandatory, then
it's important.
It's great, but it's not mandatory, so okay, take it or leave it, and this is a problem, I think. So the public health authorities, they were afraid of, let's say, some backfire if they introduced the new vaccine in the NIP in this modern society on a mandatory basis. They went for non-mandatory, but it backfired. It was like HPV vaccination rate in Slovenia is below 50%.
How much low?
Below 50%.
Oh, I see.
And for pneumococcal vaccine, which is like over 90% in all Western European countries that have like non-mandatory vaccination, we have, in 4 years, we haven't reached 60%, which is interesting. But I agree, it all comes down to the primary care provider, the pediatrician in Slovenia, which, primary care for kids in Slovenia is mostly done by a pediatrician at the primary level. It's not GPs. And we did a survey on perception on vaccination in 2001, and we then asked the parents, who do you trust most regarding immunization? It was the primary care provider, with like 85%. And the same score was achieved as the most trustworthy source was achieved. Also, the same score was found out that by the recent study, part of it that's been published in this public health journal. So basically, we have to give some tools to primary care providers, but I'm quite sure that most of them already have extensive knowledge, because, if there is this, if you're good have good communication skills, you probably do well in clinical work. If you don't get on with people, you go to public health.
Yes.
So I think doing clinical work, we have communication skills.
Do you believe that this is enough, like that the primary care physicians have this good relationship with the patients? Do you believe that this is enough, or should we maybe consider taking also like a national approach, such as promoters of science?
I think that they should be given some tools, that they have some materials that they can present to the parents saying, look, like for measles, if you have like 10,000 people that are not vaccinated against measles, then you will have like 9,000.
But you believe that this is enough? That we don't need, for example, like...
I think that this would, let's say, more clearly illustrate the scope of the problem, put the vaccine and the disease in the same landscape. Because now what we see, we just see fear of vaccines, and we are not aware of the diseases these vaccines prevent. So basically, it's a problem. We are more aware of risk of autism, we are more aware of risk of allergies, and we just don't bother because polio or diphtheria are some exotic, some literary terms, so it's non-existent. So we have to put the vaccine and the disease on the same sheet of paper. So, and then there is some, let's say, then you can have some balanced information, and then you can practically make the decision more easily. Because today's parents, they don't want to harm their child. And basically, by consenting to vaccination, they're exposing their child to the risk of side effects. By non-vaccinating, then they prevent the potential side effects. And the fear of disease is like, there is no disease.
Let me just add some word. Thank you very much. I think that you touched really one of the main problem. One of the questions that I try to answer in my book is this question: why the latest generations, my generation, I mean the generation in large sense, from 30 years old to 50, have so much no-vaxxers? Because it's the first time that we see this kind of problem. And indeed, as mentioned, my generation, that's me in Rapallo when I was 1980s, the one who is crying to the shooter. And there is something new there from evolutionary point of view, because they were friend of mine in Rapallo, and today they are all still alive, which is not normal from evolutionary point of view. It's enough to make a jump only a century before, just a century before, in a classroom, in the same group, and you realize that in Italy, 4 out of 10 kids died of infectious diseases, like, variola, polio, tuberculosis, typhus. Okay? This is, if you want to go, we have this statistical tool in Italy, and you can see, really impressive the mortality rate. And so we have to distinguish, and now we go back to the cognitive approach, to the neuro approach. Our brain has huge problem to understand the real risk and the perception risk, the risk, the social perception of risk. We have the idea that infectious diseases disappeared, but this is not true. Infectious diseases are there. If you avoid to vaccinate the population, immediately measles, pertussis, rise up, go back. So our perception is that, that we are safe, but this is not true. And why we have to take a risk to our kids? If I don't see, my brain, does not perceive any risks, and then the doctors ask me to take this risk for an infectious disease that maybe will show a problem in the next 10 or 15 years. It's real, it's an hard work for our brain. I don't see any problem on infectious disease. Then I avoid vaccination. Indeed, in the other part of the world, or let me say this before, if I talk to my mother always tells me the story of a friend of her in the same building when she was 7 with the polio, trying to, running with all the group of friends. It was quite typical to go in the school and go to a friend, to a classmate, in the hospital because of the polio, with the iron lung. And this single social tragedy because it's tragedy to see on a bus, in the street, in the same building, people disfigured with variola, for instance, over there, of people, unable to walk. So this is, for our brain, just something like 40 years ago, was a sort of social warning, something that, recall to our brain how dangerous infectious diseases are. But, with the vaccination, we, almost eradicated or diminished all the infectious diseases. We don't see any disease, and then we avoid vaccination. It's a sort of arithmetic law, also in the history of medicine in the past, with the variola. There was a period of epidemics, then people run to the vaccination center, then the population catch up the herd immunity, that is the 95% of people vaccinated, more or less. Then the infectious disease disappear. People, citizens, realize that there is no more any problem. And after 15, 10, 20 years, they start to, forget the risk, of infectious disease, and then avoid vaccination. Indeed, in the less, fortunate part of the world, where is polio is still present, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, they don't have any form of vaccine hesitancy because they perceive the risks of infectious disease. We, the lucky part of the world, are hesitant. But and indeed also in Italy, I say the same old story. We have a lot of movements of no-vaxxers. Then what's happened? Vaccination rate go down, and then immediately you have an epidemic of meningitis. In Tuscany was quite famous between 2015 and 16. And you see people line them up to get vaccinated. Or, for instance, also for measles in Sicily 1 year ago. So when you show to the brain of Homo sapiens the risks of infectious disease, then his brain realizes immediately and tend to ignore any secondary effect of vaccination. But without this risk perception, not real risk, but risk perception, our brain, or at least part of the society, have problem to realize this kind of complex reasoning and then avoid information. So that you Mark, really touched the one of the pivotal point of the vaccine hesitancy.
I just want to add a quote from Peter Sandeman, who's famous guy doing risk assessment or dealing with risk. So he said that risks that upset people or irritate people are not the same risks that kill people. So, this is the risk perception.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe now we would move on to another topic that is present in your book, which you've also touched on in your previous answer. You were talking about the 5 women who died in Italy because they chose they chose some alternative medicine that is more natural in a way. So this is something I would like to focus on now. In your book, you also analyze this fascination with nature, which is by many opponents of vaccination considered as a source of good, and is even mythicized as well-intentioned, just, and wise, often stating that nature knows best. In contrast, everything made by humans is considered undiscerning, if not even harmful and dangerous. Yet, paradoxically, a major part of our culture was formed to protect us from nature. This goes from the discovery of fire to the invention of vaccines, which protect us from infectious diseases. So, if we consider human-made things on one hand and natural things on the other hand, what do you believe is the criteria by which something is considered natural? So does something become unnatural or even against nature, perhaps as soon as humans intervene?
It's really a philosophical question. I used to show these funny things, something just not right, say these two cavemen. Our air is clean, our water is pure, we all get plenty of exercise, everything we eat is really organic and free range, and yet nobody lives past 30. Generally, I start the course on history of medicine by showing another slide in which I show that from when we abandoned the trees, we divided from primates, until 1830, we live on the average, the life expectancy was 35 years old. So for the entire history of mankind, we live 35 years old, average, okay? And we start to, to change and to live longer with the help of technology, pharmaceutical treatment, chemistry. I know it's a bit counterintuitive, but nature is not always a good thing. Indeed, there is a chapter of my book in which I analyze, that between 2000 and 2010, all the big part of epidemics in Europe came out from Waldorf school and homeopath. Because, this kind of alternative medicine tend to avoid vaccination. So the naturalistic approach see any kind of chemical approach to life, artificial or man-made approach to life, as something like against our nature. But this is, it's a huge mistake. Not only because, as mentioned, we, last century and a half demonstrate that just because of chemistry and, of course, also education, we, live longer. But also because in all the history of mankind, let's analyze, for instance, agriculture. We try to force nature. We create hybrid. For instance, corn. If you look at corn or apples during Renaissance, there were not nutritional elements in them, or tomatoes, for instance. So by the modification by human beings of nature, create an environment which help people to live longer. And to refuse, this attitude is to have, what cognitive psychologists call the omission bias. There are several examples in which, you offer a context of risky choice, and then you realize that there is a tendency to choose to omit this choice, to do not do anything, even when it exposes you to a greater risk. So if you offer to, to citizens the possibility to get vaccine, and or to wait for the natural infection disease. That is the question: do you prefer to be vaccinated with the artificial vaccination, or to get the natural version of measles? A big part of the population still think that the natural version of measles is less dangerous, which is, not true. So it's a huge tendency to think that nature is a good thing. Let me answer to your question by saying that nature is neither bad nor good. Nature is unsensible and irrelevant for human beings. There is a struggle among all the species, and then in some time we have a good place to live. We don't have any infectious disease. In some other, nature is very tough and bad, and so we have to develop any tools to block the dangerous things that nature can cause to human beings, earthquakes, epidemics, and several other problems. So, but still, in the population, when you propose organic foods or normal food, they still think that normal food has more problem than biological food. And then when we desire to live like our grandpa or grandma, we still have to think that they live something like 30 years less than we live. So please think to this problem, that all the chemical stuff, all the technology is not an enemy of human beings, but it's basically, of course there are exceptions, but are made to save and to prevent human beings from huge problems that we always lived in our past, and just in the last century and a half we partially solved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think nature is not good, neither bad. It just doesn't give a damn about us. And actually, I think medicine is doing everything to ensure the health of the mankind, and actually thus combats natural selection with the use of modern medicine. People who would normally won't be able to have kids now can have kids. People that would not live to adulthood can live to adulthood. And people who would die of lots of diseases can now survive and live longer. So I think medicine does a lot of stuff that is actually going against natural selection, but it is for the mankind.
If we continue a little bit more on this topic, maybe, in your book you mention or you coin, or maybe, yeah, you mention immunity gained by vaccinating, and in your book it's considered artificially acquired immunity. However, when it comes to vaccination, we're taking advantage of a natural mechanism of the immune system, and we also, the vaccines contain natural ingredients, such as, for example, live attenuated viruses. So, having this mythization of nature in mind, should we maybe emphasize this natural aspect of vaccination when it comes to the promotional campaigns for vaccination? Would this be maybe, in your opinion, a reasonable tactic of tackling the so-called alternative medicine, which is so prevalent also because it exploits the trend of praising everything that is natural?
You touch a really interesting point and very sophisticated, let me say. Indeed, we at CNR, National Council of Research, I'm conducting a research with pregnant women. I start with answering in this way. The first things in Europe that you say to a pregnant woman is, okay, quit any pharmaceutical treatment. That is right. And then 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, you have to say, okay, but start to think about vaccination. So it's, it's a counterintuitive. On one side, you mention that you have to avoid any, pharmaceutical treatment. And on the other side, you are proposing something like which is, received and evaluated as really dangerous chemical treatment. And one of the points is to insist on the natural aspect of vaccination, because attenuation of virus and microbes is the basic, elements of vaccination. So our idea, and we are testing this with a series of questions in the hospitals all over the country in Italy, that we are trying to explain vaccination as a natural treatment and see whether or not this idea should be accepted by pregnant women. Also from an historical point of view, this is true, because I just mentioned this point in the book briefly, but in the half of the 19th century, there was an important discussion between homeopaths and classical physician of whether or not vaccination was a sort of homeopathy, because there is the same conception. You take something which cause a disease, you diminish its force, you attenuate this molecule or the force of this, the dangers of this virus, for instance, and then you inoculate, you stimulate the organism to create his own defense against this. So it's quite similar to the idea of homeopathy. And then, indeed, for the first 20 years, at the end of the 19th century, the homeopath accepted this kind of attitude. And they were not against vaccination. Then, this is the big part of this discussion was in UK. Then, homeopath took a new direction by opposing towards all the classical medical treatment, and they became more and more hesitant toward vaccination. But at the beginning, they were right in realizing that the two mechanisms were very, very common.
Would you like to add anything? Maybe from your clinical perspective, do you also have...
I think that, you know, using the body's natural defense mechanisms to induce immune response and immunity is a good thing. And it's even better than the real thing, because it's if you take tetanus as an example, you can get tetanus by very small amount of the toxin, which is not sufficient to provide an immune response. So you can get tetanus, but you are not, by having tetanus, surviving tetanus, you are not immune. So basically, it's even better than nature to immunize, let's say. But you know, if you talk about homeopathy, I'll just add one thing. You know which political system was the largest, let's say, defender, or who was most fascinated by homeopathy?
Yeah.
The Nazi,
the
Nazi Germany.
The Nazi Germany, yeah.
So there were a lot of scientific evidence that was collected during the fascist, the regime, and but they did not publish the results for quite some time. But in the end, they were published to some extent, those studies, and they have shown that, you know, it doesn't work better than placebo. So,
yeah.
Okay, so now we've been talking for about an hour, so maybe we should open the questions to the audience. We have a portable microphone, so if anybody has any questions.
Please,
nobody?
Don't be shy. Yeah, please.
First of all, thanks for this wonderful evening with such an interesting topic. I wonder whether maybe showing the evidence of all these infectious diseases that we went through, like polio, like many others, you know, just showing to the people how they looked like, wouldn't it help them understanding that 20 or 30 years of the period that we don't see those diseases is just a transient time, and that they are coming back again? It is like, you know, sometimes you have to have fear to do something. But I'm not for fearing people. But let's say that they have forgotten how polio really looked like. And they would be more aware that this danger is close and the disease can come again. I just wonder. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Your question is very interesting, really. There is a huge discussion on this topic. Basically, whether showing the theory is called fear appeal in specific scientific literature, which is the approach, cognitive approach, which supports the idea that by showing something dangerous, you remove, you know, the resistance of the patient. I discussed a lot in Italy on this topic, and I arrived to, basing my idea, I review all the data on this topic. It's a complicated answer, because there is part of the literature which say no. Fear appeal failed when you give an information and you scare people. People close their minds and refuse even more your suggestion. And this is a part of interpretation. The other part say, look, it depends on how you use the danger information. That's why you can find, on literature, both aspects. The one supporting fear appeal, the other against. The point is very delicate and sophisticated in the literature. In this slide, I show the basic concept of vaccine hesitancy. Basically, vaccine hesitancy is a continuum, okay? Here you have parents who accept all the vaccines. Then you have parents who accept but is quite hesitant. Then you start to find a percentage of citizens and parents who accept some vaccines and refuse other, and then you arrive to no-vaxxers. So, to simplify the answer, we can, divide hesitancy in at least 3 parts. The people who are pros, and we can ignore them because they naturally exposed to vaccination. And then we have to divide hesitant and no-vaxxers, the so-called refusals, no-vaxxers or refusal, or Taliban, okay? Well, with the hesitant people showing fear appeal, showing dangerous image, can be counterproductive, because they don't want to be scared. But if you are quite, integralist, if you are really no-vaxxers, the fear can gain something. Let me say, so basically you have to use this kind of cognitive nudge of cognitive tools with certain patients, but to avoid this with others. And, this is too much complicated. These 2 papers, Pediatrics and PNAS, just, analyze this kind of concept. What is very important is to avoid, to insist on the efficacy of the vaccines, to support vaccination is not important. I know, it is completely counterintuitive. We should expect that, if someone is hesitant, you just have to explain that vaccines are safe and they're very efficacious, and that's it. But a lot of research explain us that you have to avoid to insist on vaccination, and it's better to push all the discussion with the hesitant on the possible risks of infectious disease, which is quite close. It's not to insist on danger. So in this way you will die. Look at this picture. They use picture with, a picture with a child with measles. This picture moved part of the people, but what was very important was to explain that independently of the information, fake or real, that you have in mind, For instance, even when parents still think that there is a relationship between autism and vaccination, you have to ignore. You don't have to contradict. You have to avoid countering information. And it's rather important to create a frame of risk. Just think whatever you want concerning vaccination, but just think that we have problem with infectious disease. Then, in the context of loss of health, this is the basic concept of one of my heroes, the Nobel Prize Kahneman. Here we are. He explained that Homo sapiens has a risk aversion. So if we create a loss frame that your child can lose health without vaccine, independent of whether they are toxic or not, then you can have some results. That's very important. And intuitively we are on the other side, because if you have doubts concerning vaccination, basically my mind pushed me in this direction. I have to remove your doubts and convince you that vaccines are good. No, this is wrong. It's better to create a loss framework and insist on the infectious disease and the loss of health. That's the point, basically, which is not so far away from what you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah. I agree. And the research has shown that, scaring parents is counterproductive. So you actually just enforce their views by showing the consequences of the disease or the impact of the disease. So I think we have to be more clever.
Yeah.
Maybe if I can add something here, this is also something that can be tackled by the public health institutions. For example, they can provide the pediatricians or the general practitioners with guidelines on how to act when they face certain people who refuse to vaccinate, because it's a spectrum, right? Not everybody is the same, and not everybody needs to hear the same.
I would go not to public health. I would go to health literacy expert.
Yeah. Any more questions? No? Okay.
I would just add, I think that one of the goals is to, let's say, make people more educated in, let's say, in reading science and interpreting scientific data. So I think this is, let's say, one of conditions that have to be met in order to, let's say, increase public acceptance, because there's a lot of scientific evidence that vaccines are safe, but it's sometimes hard to communicate the benefits on a scientific basis, and but if we have literacy in science, then maybe people will be, let's say, more prone to accepting.
Yeah. And indeed, in the book, I totally agree. And scientific literacy, I just focus on my book on the cognitive mechanism within, which are underneath the acceptance of science. And the risk-benefits ratio, probability, uncertainty, multiple choices, conflicting information are the typical problem of vaccination. Are the typical problem to accept vaccination, are the mechanism underneath the GMO acceptance, nuclear energy. So we have problem to understand science because, you know, we have a lot of, I avoided to mention the cognitive bias. So our problem in evaluating science, we have really a lot of problems. And then now that we have these new tools, I think that, you know, medical humanities can help, you know, general practitioner, all the physician to, you know, to communicate correctly with the public. And of course, this is one part of the moon, one face of the moon. The other face of the moon that also me, you, and all the physicians also have cognitive bias when they do diagnosis. So we now, today, realize that we have a lot of problem by acting rationally.
We're all human.
We are all human. And then we have to, you know, to do this course of scientific literacy, to do our best towards ourselves and then towards society and patients, I think. But we are all in the same boat, of course.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? No. Okay, then I would like to thank Dr. Marko Pokorn and Andrea Grignoliom for joining us today. I would also like to thank all of you. Profesor bomo jutri tudi predavanje na pediatrični kliniki ob 2:30. Ob dveh, se opravičujem. Na kar ste tudi vabljeni, sicer pa hvala za udeležbo. No.
Uro pa pol. 97. 97 slide.
Yeah. Yes, because because in case no vaxxers, you know, pose some question, I have all the reply and the answers. Yeah.
Bo pa na pediatrični kliniki to, v UKC Ljubljana.
To je una ta lepa steklena stavba, ko pridete noter, levo pol kletja.
What he said?
I just told them
Where your lecture.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, because it's, you know, with every country, when you look at children's hospital, brand new, and you look, what's this old building? Oh, it's infectious diseases hospital. They all think, oh, we will be obsolete. Yeah, but you know, we're still there. In spite of all the vaccines, you know, there's new diseases. Yeah.
Še enkrat najlepša hvala vsem.